Hello and welcome to another book review. This week I'm going to be reviewing Stephen King's Dr. Sleep. Normally I would show you a cover of the novel, but I listened to this via audiobook on my app Overdrive, which plugs in through the public library. So I'll talk a little bit about Stephen King, then I'll go into a brief synopsis of the plot, no heavy spoilers, and then I'll go on to what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, and I'll finish off with who I would recommend the book to. If you don't know who Stephen King is, he's written many major works over the last 40 years that you've probably have either read the book of or seen an adaptation via television or movie. The big ones: The Shining, It, The Stand, Cujo, Carrie. So it's a long list. He's a very accomplished writer. I think looked it up online. I think this is the 19th novel of his that I've read. I by no means am a Stephen King completist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do enjoy a lot of his novels, and I have read quite a few of them. The thing to note about this novel is it is a direct sequel to The Shining, which is probably best known as the movie that Jack Nicholson starred in, the Stanley Kubrick directed The Shining. This novel is a direct sequel to Stephen King's work, The Shining, so many of the same characters reappear. The main character in this novel, Danny Torrance, is actually the character who was the child in the original The Shining, and he has since grown up, and the novel kind of follows him as he battles his both literal and figurative demons. If you've ever read On Writing, Stephen King's work that shows kind of his both, it's kind of a memoir / how-to manual, kind of goes through his writing process, and you also kind of learn more about his background. He was by any stretch of the imagination, a drug and alcohol addict for a period of time in his life. I think he began becoming sober in the mid-90s. But it is documented in that, and he has written about it in other places as well. And you can see that in this book. The main character's struggles with substance abuse feels very, very real. It feels like it's written by someone who had to go through similar struggles, which is kind of one of the best parts about the book. A real brief synopsis of the book, like I said before, the child in The Shining who has supernatural powers, has the ability to read the thoughts of others, and is just really cute senses in many ways. He is a struggling addict, and he wanders the country for a while, and then he settles down in a town in the Northeast, working at a hospice. Through a chain of events, he begins to become the mentor of a young girl who is exhibiting similar powers to what he had when he was a child. And there is a group of villains who act as antagonists to these characters. So not giving away too much there. What did I like about the novel? I think for a direct sequel, which are very, very difficult to do, this was written over... I think the original Shining came out in the mid-70s, early to mid-70s. So I think this novel was written in 2000, published in 2013. So almost 40 years later. It is by no means a cheap cash-in. He really thought about who these characters were. You could tell he cares about the characters deeply and wanted to provide them an organic story about what has happened in their lives since in the intervening years, and what their lives would be like if they were quote-unquote alive today. So I felt that was really strong. Really, he has a sense of this character, Danny Torrance, the main character of the novel, and I think he stays true to that character. I think the novel does a good job of being scary without being really gory and graphic. I think there are some passages in the novel, especially when he kind of introduces the main antagonist of the novel, that are great. Some of the best writing I think I've ever read of his. I think in a lot of ways, the attention to detail is something that he doesn't get quite enough credit for, but it's really on display in the way that he kind of turns phrases and makes them, by repeating them and making them, I don't know a better way to say it, but basically planting them in your mind repeatedly, and they just get larger, larger, and scarier the more you read them. So I thought that was all really well done. I thought the ending, in the sense of where the characters the characters are when the novel finishes, is like pitch perfect. I thought that was great. I think the novel is well paced. I think that the characters who are introduced, who are new characters, I think they hold their own for the most part in this novel. I think the kind of the person who's introduced to be Danny's trainee, or his student to his tutor, I think is an interesting character in a lot of ways. I'll kind of talk about that in a little bit when I get to the downsides of the novel. Before I do that, I want to give kind of, like I said, I listened to this on audiobook, and I think the narrator, Will Patton, was just like an outstanding job on this. It really felt like listening to an actor read this as a play as opposed to reading it as a literature. And he really, I felt, added so much to the experience of this. It was outstanding. I was walking and listening to it in the daytime, and just the hair would like rise on my arms. It was just wonderful. I mean, it was just, I was immersed in the experience, and it was like the best way to enjoy this work, in my opinion. Some of the downsides that I didn't like, if you've read enough Stephen King, like I have, you'll see that Stephen King has some kind of, and I think this is true of most authors, has some kind of tics. He has writerly tics to his work that you can kind of see if you look hard enough. I think he's gotten flack before, and I think he will get probably flack again for this novel as far as the ending. The ending is a little anticlimactic. It kind of builds up and it doesn't quite pay off. I think in part of that reason is the action sequences in this novel. It may have been, again, because I was listening to it via audiobook, but I don't think they necessarily held together that great. They seem to come and go in a pretty quick fashion. In addition to that, the antagonists in this novel, while they're introduced, and I think while they're kind of interesting characters, in some ways, I don't think you ever get the sense that they're as strong as the protagonist. They don't really act as effective as a foil as they can. I think their existence in the novel is a unique twist on kind of an old idea that I thought was cool, but in the end, I don't think they really feel as menacing as maybe they should. And I think, kind of to what I was saying before about having kind of a young character, I think Stephen King actually did a pretty good job with that particular character as far as portraying someone of a certain generation. I think in overall, though, the novel and some things I've read in the past as far as criticisms of him, he doesn't do a great job of sometimes having characters not sound like someone in Stephen King's generation. You can sometimes read between the lines of the fiction as far as Stephen King's feelings on certain things. I think that's true in this novel. Also, and again, this is maybe not the sharpest criticism in the world, but the novel kind of follows kind of a tried and true plot device. If you've ever seen the movie Logan, and probably a million and one other stories that I can't think of off the top of my head right now, is kind of the idea of the gruff teacher teaching the eager student. There's that here as well. Well, I'm trying to think of just off the head anything else that I really had a strong problem with. I don't think I really had a strong problem with anything else. Like I said, I think overall I did enjoy this book. I think that if you are looking for something that is going to be surpassing The Shining, I don't think this is that book for a lot of people. If you have really fond memories of that novel and you read it 20 or 30 years ago, I think I read The Shining back when I was in college, so it's probably been almost 15 years since I read that. But I didn't have really super strong feelings about that novel. It's not really one of my favorites of his, so I didn't really have any problem with him writing a sequel. And like I said, I think the fact that he took his time to write this, It doesn't feel like something he just like wrote out over 2 weekends. It's really clear that he has fondness for these characters and wants to see what happened to them enough to create a realistic situation for them to be in. I really did appreciate that. He actually talks a little bit at the end of the audiobook. There's a chapter from him where he talks about the difficulty sometimes in creating a sequel to something that people care about, and how once someone has kind of decided like that is the thing, that story is a sacred cow, it's just really difficult to uproot that idea. And people are either going to like that or they're not going to like this, like that. I thought that the work was done with enough skill and with enough craft to get over those objections myself, and your mileage may vary on that. I would say if you're someone who has not read Stephen King before, I definitely would not start here. I would definitely start with a few other books before reading this, and I would also make sure to have read The Shining, because I don't think you're going to appreciate it as much if you just come into this cold. I think you can read it and you can understand certain things, but I think to really get some of the themes, the stronger themes in this book, as far as, you know, what do you owe if you're given this gift, in the sense that you have this power? What do you owe yourself? What do you owe other people? Is redemption possible once you've done a heinous act? And that he ties all those things together really well to the idea of sobriety, and why someone who is moving towards sobriety would want to do that, and in kind of tandem with the question of who is owed and what is owed, and how gratitude fits into those things. So I think the book does work on a deeper level than just the supernatural. I think there are some real things in this novel that if you are someone who has gone through addiction, or know people who have gone through addiction, that I think you'll be able to relate to this, or they will be able to relate to this really well. Just real quick, last thing that I thought of that I didn't really care for. There's a kind of a twist in the end, towards the end of the novel, as far as characters, two characters, the relationship to one another. I could have done without that. I thought it was kind of unnecessary, just from a story standpoint. I don't think it really added too much, and it kind of got in the way, in my opinion. Beyond that, that's pretty much the review. I would recommend it to people who have maybe read a few Stephen King books, or have read The Shining and really enjoyed The Shining. Actually, as long as you didn't love The Shining and think it was one of the greatest things ever written by a human, I think you'll enjoy this book. Because like I said, I think it's done well enough to where you can enjoy it, as long as you're not going in with blinders. I think it's well done. I don't think it's necessarily going to be anybody's favorite book of the decade or anything like that, but I do think that it is well done and worth a read. And the language itself, when you're reading this, I think you can feel that you're kind of in the hands of a master in a lot of ways. So I have a lot of respect for Stephen King. I like him a lot. If you're someone who really is not a huge Stephen King fan, and you've read a few of his things, and you're just not digging it, I don't think this book will turn you around. So that's the review. I don't have anything else. I don't know what else I'm going to review next, so I'll just ask, if you did enjoy the channel, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon.